This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Soldier kills 12 people and injures 9 others in a shooting incident in the DRC. Kenya reopens its airspace, but flights from several African and European countries remain suspended. And China commemorates the founding of the People's Liberation Army. Hello and thank you for joining us. This is Africa live from Nairobi. I'm Mahia Mutua. Also coming up, in business, South Africa delays implementation of a universal basic income grant. And in the sport, organizers cancel the 2020 edition of the Great Ethiopian Run due to COVID-19. Let's begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where at least 12 people have been killed in a shooting incident involving a soldier. The incident happened in South Kivu province. 9 others were also wounded. Authorities say the soldier was drunk when he opened fire on passers-by. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The shooting happened in the village of Sange in the DRC's South Kivu province. Local officials say a drunken soldier shot at 20 civilians at a large market. At least 12 people were killed and 9 others wounded. Angry residents blocked roads and burnt tires in protest over the killings. The government and the UN peacekeeping mission have sent troops to calm the population. The Army's regional spokesperson, Captain Diodone Kasereka, says the soldier is still on the run. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi condemned the killings and expressed his condolences to the families of the victims. Human rights organizations and the UN have on several occasions condemned Congolese soldiers for committing crimes against civilians. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Kenya has resumed international flights to and from its airspace. This follows the easing of movement restrictions by President Uhuru Kenyatta last month. National carrier Kenya Airways flew its first international flight to London after a 4-month lull on Saturday morning. Several other airlines, including British Airways, KLM, Lufthansa and Ethiopian Airlines, are expected to land in Kenya later in the day. Kenya Airways CEO Alan Kilavuka says they expect to resume passenger flights to China in October. Across Africa, the airline will resume flights to Accra and several other African cities based on demand and other factors. Kenya has, however, excluded major European nations from a list of countries whose nationals will be allowed into the country. Well, several months into the coronavirus pandemic, the aviation industry in Africa is gearing up to resume operations. Some of the major airlines operating within the continent are expected to welcome passengers in accordance with guidelines issued by the International Civil Aviation Organization. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy looks at some of the new regulations.
The International Civil Aviation Organization produced new guidelines with advice from the World Health Organization on what governments need to do to resume international air transport amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The new guidelines are intended to support the restart of air travel in a safe, secure and sustainable way. Now, just to take you through some of the COVID-19 protocols in place for the aviation industry. Departing passengers will be expected to arrive at the airport at least 4 hours before boarding, go through airport health screening procedures, present a valid health certificate from their respective health ministries. Now, passengers to wear face masks and observe physical distancing. In addition, countries have also come up with their own specific guidelines subject to changes on short notice. Now, cabin crew to wear gloves, aircraft crew to maintain the 1.5-meter rule inside the cabin, reduced food and drink services, modified services that reduce interactions between passengers and the crew in flight. Operators to avoid long stopovers and layovers to reduce the risk of infection. Now, crew members will be restricted to their hotel rooms except for emergencies. Now, here are some of the major airlines that have rolled out flight schedules in Africa. Now, Egypt Air returned to the African sky back in July with flights to Tunis and Addis Ababa. It's now gradually resuming flights to Nairobi and N'Djamena starting 1st of August. Now, also at the start of the month, Rwanda Air will begin passenger services to Cotonou, Douala and Lusaka, among other African routes. We're also seeing Kenya Airways opening its doors to over 30 African locations with flights to Antananarivo, Yaoundé and Harare, among others. Ethiopian Airlines has remained operational throughout the past months. Now that more national airspaces are reopening, the carrier plans to resume further services pending on travel restrictions. There are planned flights to dozens of African cities, including Abidjan, Conakry and Mogadishu. Now, other airlines with plans to restart their African routes include Air France, British Airways, Emirates, KLM and Qatar Airways. According to a latest report by the African Airlines Association, Africa's aviation industry will suffer an estimated revenue loss of $8 billion this year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact assessment analysis shows passenger revenue dropped to $403 million in the first quarter of 2020. Now, this represents 13.8% drop year on year, with more impact expected to be seen in quarter two, costing $2.7 billion. And that's it. Back to you.
Now, the World Health Organization and the Africa Centers for Disease Control have urged African governments to do more to protect health workers fighting COVID-19. More than 10,000 medical personnel in 40 countries have contracted the coronavirus so far, and there are fears many more could be infected as cases on the continent rise rapidly. Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
On the front line of the outbreak, every day these health workers come into direct contact with people infected with COVID-19. But as coronavirus cases appear to spread fast across Africa, there are warnings from officials that the risk they face is increasing.
We know the number of infections, but we don't yet have the exact counts of those that have died because of the COVID infection. Many countries are reporting a large number of patients that are asymptomatic, which is a good thing, which means, but we now know that countries are beginning to see their hospital systems overwhelmed because they need to manage that.
The World Health Organization says health workers with COVID-19 make up more than 5% of cases in 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa alone. And in total, more than 10,000 medical personnel on the continent have been infected. The World Health Organization says the risk for health workers is heightened by inadequate access to personal protective equipment and also weak infection prevention and control measures in many countries. They and the Africa CDC are asking countries to invest in more PPE and facilities through an online portal that the Africa CDC has created that links countries directly to credible manufacturers. There are also warnings about other challenges medical staff face.
They also suffer psychological pressures from working around the clock. We have seen in countries where the situation is serious how hard the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, and others are working. And in some communities, they face stigma and discrimination because of fears and misinformation around this virus.
Some hospitals have organized special programs to try and keep their workers motivated, but others are left to cope on their own. Africa is now closing in on 1 million cases of the virus, and the concern is that without more physical and mental support, medical staff trying to fight the virus will end up battling their own health problems. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Today marks Army Day in China, a day to commemorate the founding of the People's Liberation Army. It was initially known as the Chinese Workers' and Peasants' Red Army when it was founded in 1927. Earlier this morning, a flag-raising ceremony was held at Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Now, during times of peace, the Chinese army serves to protect people's livelihoods and properties. As central and southern China are hit by floods, over 700,000 troops have been dispatched for rescue and relief efforts. Dai Kai-yi has more.
In central China's Hubei province, a troop of nearly 500 military personnel rushed to repair a dam that had been destroyed in flooding. It's the 6th location they were sent to within 5 days.
It's never too much of a sacrifice to fix these dams. This is what I'm supposed to do as a soldier.
The unit also served as frontline responders back in 1998, when severe flooding wreaked havoc in Hubei province to a similar extent. After 22 years, they were shouldering the responsibility once again.
Paratroopers have put all their efforts into fighting the 3 flooded rivers. The 950,000 residents here in the city are grateful for what they did for the community.
Southern China has been ravaged by severe floods for the past 2 months, with water reaching record levels. Millions of people have been evacuated. It's also cost more than $16 billion in damages and impacted over 2.4 million hectares of crops. But the armed forces have been sent to help.
The People's Liberation Army and Armed Police Force have dispatched a total of 725,000 soldiers and 228,500 militias for nearly 38,000 rescue efforts, including fortifying 900 kilometers of dams, dredging roads as long as 224 kilometers, and helping evacuate almost 140,000 residents.
After 3 waves of floods formed in the upper reaches of the Yangtze River, flooding in southern China has now tapered off. But the frontline responders are still working around the clock to help cities and counties recover. In the county of Jiangxi province, officials are helping replant seedlings after the farmers' crops were destroyed by the flooding.
Military personnel are here to support me, helping me plant crops this afternoon. And they're still in the crop field. I thank them very much.
As the flooding withdraws, we are racing against time to plant seedlings for the farmers in the region, hoping to offset some of the losses brought by the floods.
Dai Kai, CGTN.
Well, let's take a look at the Chinese People Liberation Army's growing role in UN peacekeeping missions across the world. Chuck Tinte tells us more.
China joined the United Nations peacekeeping missions for the first time in 1990, when it sent 5 military observers to the Middle East. Since then, among the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, China is the largest contributor of personnel to UN peacekeeping efforts. In the past 3 decades, some 40,000 Chinese Blue Helmet troops have been deployed to 25 UN peacekeeping operations in war-torn areas. They have treated more than 200,000 patients and completed many long and short-distance patrols. 15 Chinese peacekeepers have sacrificed their lives in these missions.
China's speed, China quality, and China model can be found in every mission area, especially the local residents. They're very grateful to Chinese peacekeepers for maintaining peace with blood and life.
China's active participation in UN peacekeeping is in line with its commitment to multilateral organizations as a means of cooperation and achieving peace and stability. It has established a peacekeeping office and a center for training personnel in Beijing. At present, more than 2,500 Chinese peacekeepers are serving in 9 areas. China is also the second largest contributor to the UN's peacekeeping budget. At the 2015 UN Peacekeeping Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping pledged China's commitment to building a permanent Chinese UN peacekeeping standby force of 8,000 troops. As of 2017, registration for this has been completed. He also promised free military aid of $100 million to the African Union.
I think we'll definitely step up our efforts in peacekeeping. For example, we'll send more Chinese troops to the front line. We'll train foreign peacekeeping troops and provide peacekeeping equipment. We'll also further join the peacekeeping standby mechanism.
Where peace remains fragile, top officials have said China will not waver in delivering on its promise to UN peacekeeping efforts. Chuck Tinte, CGTN.
Well, China Media Group, CGTN's parent company, spoke to some of China's peacekeeping officers and soldiers about their missions.
When we carry out our missions, local residents would always give a thumbs up and say, "China good." At that moment, our sense of pride and mission arose.
The happiest moment is when I hear the sound of explosions.
Being away from my country made me realize how precious the peace there is.
I hope there will be no war and the world keeps peace forever. I hope Mali's children can get better conditions for education.
I sincerely hope that the people of the Darfur region of Sudan will emerge from war soon. I wish them happy and healthy lives.
May the people of the world unite as one and overcome the pandemic.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. It's time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up. Homeschooling takes root in Kenya as learning institutions remain closed due to COVID-19. And African victims of human trafficking find a new home in Rwanda.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now in Kenya, as in many countries around the world, schools have closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Homeschooling for children is slowly gaining popularity as more parents embrace it. Some of them feel that mainstream education places learners under great pressure, unlike homeschooling, which allows guardians to always be close to their children. CGTN's Nick Mudimba has more on that story.
For many parents, giving their children a decent education remains a lifetime goal. This pushes them to try and give the young ones the best education possible. In Africa, countries have adopted different curriculums in the education systems. Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world hard, many parents now play an active role in the children's education. Some actually started doing so a long time ago.
You have a goal to achieve.
We meet Dolly Odhiambo, a mother of two who has been homeschooling her children for more than a decade now. Every morning, she takes them through the Accelerated Christian Education Program, also known as ACE. Her husband wanted the children to get a Christian foundation while adopting the fundamentals of homeschooling. The couple was inspired by a nearby homeschooling center.
We had never heard of it. So they took us through their classes, they took us through the curriculum, and my husband just felt this is something that worth trying. And then he told me that his desire was when our daughter finishes her preschool, we could try transit them to this system.
The Accelerated Education Program is individualized for each learner. It's designed to allow each student to work at their pace and ability in many subjects, including mathematics, sciences, languages, and arts. The learners, however, say society looks at them differently due to the homeschooling.
I was basically known as the boy who doesn't go to school. Everyone knew me as the boy who doesn't go to school. Everyone knew Kina mom, like mom and dad, as people who can't afford for me to go to school, me and my sister.
One of the things that I have, or we have achieved as with the children is one, being there for them, being part of their schooling journey is so important because it helps you understand your child. You understand their joys, you understand their weaknesses, you understand their struggles.
In homeschooling, the talent of children is further strengthened. Both these children are good in the arts. Music is part of their growth. The classwork is strictly monitored by the homeschooling parent who makes sure that all goals set as well as deadlines are met. The children are taught critical, creative, and independent thinking.
In an 844 system, like when I was in school, no matter how fast or how slow you are, you have to move with the whole classroom. So it will take 1 year before you transit into the next class. In what I'm doing right now, if you're extremely fast and very sharp, you don't need to go according to everyone's pace. No. So if you're extremely fast, you can take 6 months and you're in the next class.
According to Dolly, the pressure to perform well in national exams across Africa has made many students start cramming instead of understanding the concepts taught.
If you do not understand a concept, the concept of a subject, you will beat about the bush, you will cram your way around it, and it can make any subject very, very tedious. So when I was taking my daughter through her math subject, I saw how the pacework has been created in such a way that everything goes precept upon precept. So they will teach you addition, and they will teach you addition from all angles until you understand and grasp the concept.
The students sit for final exams that are recognized in Kenya through a body known as Pearsons, which places them in different universities across the globe after completing their coursework. With majority of the schools now closed in different parts of the world, parents are now scrambling for homeschooling. They're hoping that the knowledge momentum that children had will actually be up to par. But also, it's a rare opportunity for the first time to be closer to the children like never before. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, human trafficking still remains a serious problem on the African continent, despite world leaders joining forces to try and end the activity. The United Nations Refugee Agency has managed to rescue victims of abductors in Libya. In partnership with Rwanda's government, UNHCR has provided the survivors with shelter and psychological care, among other things. CGTN's Jane Keon now reports.
Samrawit is originally from Eritrea. Before arriving in Rwanda, she was taken by human traffickers and held captive for nearly 2 years in Libya. Samrawit says her captors sold their victims to different groups of traffickers and smugglers. They endured torture, extortion, and sexual abuse.
They gave us only 1 plate of food a day, and we all had to share. We ate 1 or 2 spoons per person. It was very dirty and we had no water. When we had our periods, it smelled terribly. You had to sleep on your side because it was very congested. I get very stressed sometimes because of everything I have been through. At the same time, I felt bad. I am relieved because I did not get pregnant or get a sexually transmitted disease.
Last July, the smugglers finally took 350 of them to the Mediterranean coast to attempt to cross to Europe, but the boat later began to sink. Samrawit managed to swim for 8.5 hours and was rescued by the Libyan Coast Guard, who took her to a detention center. And with help from the UN Refugee Agency, Samrawit was evacuated to Rwanda last October alongside other refugees who had been in Libya. She's now receiving psychological care to help her heal from the trauma. While she hopes to be reunited with her brother one day, Samrawit is focusing on her healing and has taken up English classes.
I am currently attending English language classes, and they have asked me if I want to learn another skill like sewing. I am very happy and grateful. We have come from darkness to light.
More than 250 people rescued from Libya live in the Gashora Transit Center on the outskirts of the capital, Kigali. Most come from Eritrea, Somalia and Sudan and have been given asylum seeker status. They are given shelter, food, water and medical care. Samrawit and other survivors also receive counseling. Every year, thousands of migrants go to Libya hoping to cross the Mediterranean to Europe, but instead face extortion and violence. UNHCR is calling on countries to protect refugees and migrants traveling through routes controlled by human traffickers and to hold those responsible to account. Jane Kale, CGTN.
Google is now translating the ancient Egyptian language in collaboration with experts. The language known as hieroglyphics is written in pictures that depict meanings on the walls of pharaonic buildings. The software will help experts save time in translating the ancient language, while amateurs will find its interface easy to use. Adel Mahroui has the details.
To most visitors of ancient Egyptian temples and tombs, that journey to witness ancient magnificence is always incomplete. Many are amazed to see the grand structures standing strong for thousands of years. But why these structures were built and what stories they depict has always been captured in hieroglyphics, the ancient Egyptian official language which very few people in the world understand. Google's Art and Cultures app is changing that experience by introducing translation technology.
Such a technology will increase the passion for the ancient Egyptian culture. People are always attracted to its greatness. Now anyone can learn the language. The move will increase its popularity. It will also increase interest of people to come here to see the hieroglyphs on the walls of temples.
Fabricius is the name of Google's new tool to decode ancient languages. It uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve its translation of ancient Egyptian inscriptions. So the technology is expected to get better as more as people use it to decipher hieroglyphs. Translating the ancient Egyptian language is not simple. That's because it can be written from left to right, top to bottom, or the other way around. And usually it's challenging for experts to read because it has been handcrafted, so shapes could vary greatly. That is, if they are still in perfect condition.
When it comes to common phrases or words, there are no difficulties in translating them. When it comes to technical words or things that depend on context, there is a challenge. In any case, we will not be able to pronounce ancient Egyptian language. We are still guessing how the language was voiced. They are pictures taken from life and give meanings, something like emojis today.
Through the software, users can upload photos, trace shapes, or select pictures engraved on Egypt's ancient treasures. They can also translate the language to and from English and Arabic, which could be appealing to many Egyptians.
While experts are concerned about the accuracy of this technology in translating hieroglyphics, it might be very popular among amateurs. At least they will be able to decipher the hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls of the temples they visit. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he will ban short video app TikTok as soon as Saturday. Speaking to reporters, Trump said he will sign an executive order banning the app. TikTok, owned by Chinese tech giant ByteDance, has been under fire over fears that it could share data of American users with the Chinese government. But TikTok says it stores user data in the United States and would not share it with Beijing authorities. In June, India banned TikTok along with more than 50 other Chinese apps, citing national security concerns. Staying in the U.S., protests against police violence and racism in the city of Portland, Oregon, continued into their 65th consecutive night on Friday, with President Donald Trump tweeting that the federal agents aren't leaving. Local police stood down as more than 2,000 marched the streets in what the mayor called a peaceful protest. Federal forces were supposed to leave on Thursday. Their presence in the city was highly opposed by demonstrators and local officials and was seen as escalating tensions. But President Trump tweeted late Friday that the federal agents were not leaving until local police cleaned up Portland of what he called anarchists and agitators. 10 people have died in southern India's Andhra Pradesh after drinking alcohol-based hand sanitizer. With liquor stores closed down due to the lockdown, the sanitizer is an easily obtainable but sometimes deadly substitute. India's federal government has allowed the reopening of most economic activities to try and stave off financial disaster. But that is despite a surge in cases nationwide, taking the total to over 1.6 million. Well, it's time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up in the business. South Africa delays implementation of a universal basic income grant. And easing coronavirus restrictions, Egypt extends operating hours for cafes and restaurants.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, South Africa will not be implementing a universal basic income grant until at least March next year. This is attributed to the coronavirus pandemic. Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu says the conversation on the introduction of the package to the unemployed masses is still on. The announcement by the minister rolls back an earlier pledge by the government to implement the program by October. Grants for the unemployed South Africans was one of the hallmarks of the late Nelson Mandela's government after the fall of the apartheid system. South Africa recently introduced around $21 of emergency worth of unemployment grants to families as a top-up to the current child and old age grants. This came as the state implemented lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID-19. Egypt has extended the operating hours of cafes and restaurants by an extra 2 hours to midnight, but they must still operate at 50% capacity. The North African nation had reduced operating hours in its initial reopening phase to limit public gatherings and curb the spread of coronavirus. CGTN's Adel Makhroui assesses how these measures will impact the industry and the Egyptian economy.
The Soui and Soda has been one of the fastest growing restaurants in Egypt. In 2019 alone, the 3-year-old domestic brand jumped from 5 to 12 branches. This year should have witnessed a spike in revenues. Instead, it has been curtailed by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The full lockdown took place on March 25th. On March 26th, our sales were zero. We then saw a gradual increase. By April, we averaged 6% of our usual sales. In May, we reached 18%, and by June, it became 28%. If the core of our business was fast food, home delivery would represent 40 to 60% of the core sales. But the normal delivery percentage in the Saswo dining sales is 14%.
Officially, 700,000 Egyptians work in cafes and restaurants. Experts estimate that figure to reach 2 million when informal labor is included. To ease the economic impact on this sector, the government increased their working hours from 10 in the evening to midnight, while maintaining a 50% restriction for occupancies.
I don't think these 2 extra hours will make a big difference in sales because the consumer behavior has changed. The lifestyle has changed. We used to start seeing flow of customers at 6 p.m. Now it's from 2. To bring the economy back to normal, life must go back to normal. Having regular working hours will reflect on when people will need a break or come to restaurants.
Going back to near normal operation hours will benefit employees whose salaries have been cut during the past months. Their income won't be the same though, as tips and bonuses are far lower than their norm. And while the impact of COVID-19 lasts, business owners have been trying to look for creative ways to keep their restaurants afloat.
We opened seasonal branches. We went to the North Coast to open a branch for a few months to generate revenues and make use of our staff's workforce. The secret to success this year is to cut costs and to survive with our brand names. If this year ends rationally, I think in best cases, restaurants
might lose 10 to 20% of their market value.
Investments in Egyptian cafes and restaurants were worth $13.5 billion in 2017.
The government restrictions are gradually getting lifted, but restaurants know it's going to be a long process for a full recovery. And the concern now is not about making profit, it's about surviving that period. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's take you back to South Africa, where in what could be a silver lining to the rainbow nation amid the current coronavirus pandemic, trade surplus has gone up. The country's positive balance widened to $2.7 billion last month, according to the South African Revenue Services. This is the biggest surplus since 1990. The statement attributes this to a 19% surge in exports of precious metals and stones. However, imports dropped by around 18%, with exports of textiles dropping by a whopping 53%. Now, COVID-19 has hit advertisers hard, with traditional advertising spots becoming a major casualty. CGTN's Leon Senyange now explores how advertising is starting to recover in Uganda as the country eases its lockdown restrictions.
A local newspaper editor picks through the month's printed papers. The past 4 months of the coronavirus lockdown have been the worst ever for this publication. A decline in advertising revenues and newspaper circulation amid the pandemic forced the paper to scale back on production.
The companies that were advertising stopped advertising because people are not working. So whom were they advertising to? And what products were they trying to put on the market? So all those things affected us. And the biggest business person in Uganda is government. Government also for some time stopped advertising.
Media organizations rely on local advertisers like telecoms, banking and beverage companies as their primary revenue source. They generate close to $100 million in advertising expenditure at least every year. Despite the current dip, it's a period many hope to recover from.
There's traffic flow, there'll be more eyeballs and stuff like that, so the rates probably will go to where they were. Or if not, the rates will be almost where they were. So I think for the out-of-home business, I think business will still come back to a significant normal. But I think where things might be tough is mainly on print, the newspapers, the magazines and stuff like that.
Uganda has been easing restrictions that have allowed businesses to resume operation, creating an opportunity for spending on advertisements to increase. Local advertising agencies say there will be more business as the country opens up. But the pandemic is likely to change the advertising industry, with companies opting for inexpensive and innovative ways to spend their money. The majority of the traditional media share of advertising is done on radio and television. Print media falls further back. The pandemic, however, has forced both agencies and their clients to rethink.
We are seeing most clients now playing in the digital space more. They are spending a lot on digital. Also, during this time, we've seen that the viewership of TV has actually gone up because guys are at home. So we've seen clients who traditionally are not on TV jumping on TV and doing animated TV to pass their message.
Uganda's television usage rose to 34% within the last 10 years and internet usage to 9% in 5 years, according to a National Information Technology survey. And with Ugandans now returning to work, access to the internet is also increasing. These are spaces advertisers are likely to focus on more in the future. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The COVID-19 crisis has upended vehicle sales and has left car dealers in Africa struggling to offload their stock. In Tunisia, car importers and dealers say the health crisis and the general lockdown has devastated the sector, as they have lost more than 90% of their usual sales and activity. Here is CGTN's Adnan Shawashi with more details.
Bassem Lokil is the founder and CEO of Lokil Group,
It is one of the leading car importers in Tunisia and North Africa. He says that sales have stopped for almost 10 weeks. Consequently, stocks in some car segments are very low because the supply chain was abruptly broken during the months of March, April and May. Lukil says that access to credit is extremely limited while the cost is really high.
Today, in order to really pull this segment of the economy out of its crisis and stagnation, we really need to look at some special measures. One, to help consumers fight the price increases, and that will be by reducing or eliminating the 15% consumer tax. Why not revising the VAT from 19.3% to maybe 12% in order to compensate the increase in price due to the devaluation of the Tunisian dinar.
Most European manufacturers make and buy their car components in Tunisia. This vital industry, which employs more than 63,000 people, has also been greatly affected by the coronavirus crisis.
Our exports of car parts to Europe total 1 billion euros per year. And therefore, in order to maintain that growth and maintain that exchange with the European car manufacturers, we also need to look at how we can entice sales and maintain at least a minimum of 42 or 40,000 new car sales per year.
The president of the National Union for the Import and Sale of Cars in the North African nation says that if the crisis persists, the whole industry could be devastated in the next few months.
The COVID-19 crisis has devastated the automotive sector. The sales are the lowest in decades. Only 118 cars were sold in May for all car importers. We've lost over 90% of our activity. This is unprecedented.
Tunisian car importers are calling on the ministries of trade and finance to give incentives to car dealers in order to preserve existing jobs and to limit the impact of the coronavirus crisis.
Experts assert that with fewer people likely traveling over the summer vacation period due to the pandemic, as well as the low purchasing power due to the economic crisis, car sales could slump even further if the state does not support car importers and consumers. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Right, here's what's coming up when we return from another short break. Several works by South African art legend Gerard Sekoto put up on sale.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Now, a number of works by South Africa's art legend Gerard Sekoto are on sale by auctioneers. Sekoto is one of Africa's most important painters of the 20th century. The paintings on sale were produced while he lived in Sophiatown, which was later demolished by the apartheid authorities. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with more.
Gerard Sekoto was a South African musician and artist. He is recognized as a pioneer of urban black art. Sekoto lived in the vibrant multiracial community of Sophiatown. The rich color of his paintings from this time captures the reality of living in the townships. They also evoke the vibrancy and energy of the cultural activity and tensions of the townships, and serve as historical records of a way of life as those areas were subsequently destroyed.
And then we have what is arguably the most important example in our sale. It's a work called The Visitor.
eastward. And that would have been painted shortly before he goes to Paris in 1947. It is a remarkable painting. It has these shimmering green leaves, these trees or hillocks in the background, the sort of lava-like orange road, and these three figures in the center of the composition. You have a man looking incredibly cool in a sort of slack jacket or blazer, leaning back on his bicycle, and then you have a woman who's potentially his a love interest gripping a child, a small child on her right. And what exactly is going on is anyone's guess. We've had some remarkable interpretations of what's happening, but either way you look at it, it's a really fabulous painting.
Gerard Sekoto had a considerable following of art collectors in South Africa and was a familiar name in the media and in art circles, an unusual achievement for a black artist at the time in South Africa. As a black South African born at the time segregation was taking a grip in the country, he would suffer the effects of racism. Frustrated by the lack of opportunities for black artists in the country, he moved to Paris on a self-imposed exile, a place where he could work and succeed on the same terms as any other person, irrespective of the color of his skin. Sekoto's works are widely sought after.
I mean, he's such an important painter in many ways. Not only is his work stunningly beautiful and velvety, but it has enormous topographical and historical importance too. The fact that he produced such an incredible body of work, makes it even more special. You could also argue the fact that he didn't have a strict academic training also is partly why his works are so wonderfully free and liberated and unusual and unique. There's a very distinct Sekoto spirit, in his works. And who knows how he might have developed if he did have a different kind of a training.
The artist would never return to South Africa, the country that inspired his colorful depictions of cultural activity and racial tensions. The artist died in 1993 in Paris. Yulisa Njomela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And coming up on Africa Live Sports. Organizers cancelled the 2020 edition of the Great Ethiopian Run due to COVID-19 pandemic.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The 2020 edition of the biggest road race in Africa, the Great Ethiopian Run, was earlier this week cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The event, started by retired distance running icon Haile Gebrselassie, was scheduled to mark its 20th anniversary this year. Organizers of the 10-kilometer road race say public health was a key factor in the decision, as CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi now reports.
The 2019 Great Ethiopian Run in Addis Ababa. For some, it was a time to set their professional athletics records, but for many, it was a time to enjoy. Foreigners coming from far and wide. The excitement during these races is often taken a notch higher when participants meet in person Haile Gebrselassie, Ethiopia's athletics legend and also the founder of the competition. But this year, the COVID-19 pandemic will not allow this to happen.
We had 45,000 runners last year, and we returned more than 10,000 people because we closed registration in 5 days, and people have to go. It's not all electronic. People have to physically go to register. So the demand is huge, but we cannot do that now. Public gathering is not allowed.
The state of emergency declared in Ethiopia because of the pandemic limits gatherings to only 4 people, and the requirements for social distancing make the race impossible. COVID-19 cases in Ethiopia are on the rise. with the Ministry of Health warning that the country is yet to hit its peak. The management of the competition says it will give an update again in September about a new date, with a probability that this year's race will take place in the first half of the year 2021, and the 21st edition of the competition will be held during the normal date, which is November 2021. To keep the momentum of the race, the management has been encouraging virtual runs, but with a limitation of 500 participants who are awarded souvenirs.
We just want to start small and then try to grow it, and then we need to see the practices in other parts of the world. And then, sometimes it's good. The special souvenir medal, not everyone will do it. It will be only a specific number of people, and we want to make it special. But for sure, we will increase the number, but we don't want to be ambitious.
But the virtual run leaves out thousands of such fans who now can only hope that the global health scare fades away soon and they get to physically participate in this annual fun event. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In England,